Balzac and the Little Chinese Seamstress by Dai C.G. Part 3, Chapter 15. The headman's teeth resembled a jagged mountain range. 3 incisors protruded from blackened, inflamed gums like flakes of prehistoric basalt, while his tobacco-stained canines were like snaggled rocks of diluvian travertine. As for the molars, some of them had such deep grooves on the crown that the dentist's son declared with an appropriately scientific air, the owner must have suffered a bout of syphilis. The headman averted his face without contradicting the diagnosis. The troublesome tooth was all the way at the back of his jaw, next to the dark, pulpy hole left by its extracted neighbor. It was a solitary, decayed wisdom tooth, as porous as a coral reef. The headman kept caressing it with his yellow tongue, which would then explore the hole next to it and finish with a consoling click against the roof of his mouth. The perambulations of the slimy tongue were interrupted by a slick steel sewing machine needle which entered the headman's mouth and hovered above the affected tooth. The tongue was immediately attracted to the intruder and ran its tip up and down the cold foreign object. It trembled, drew back, then reared up for a fresh sally, and excited by the unfamiliar sensation, licked the needle again with almost voluptuous abandon. The old tailor pressed his foot on the treadle of the sewing machine, and the up and down motion set the needle, which was attached by a string to the driving wheel, spinning around. The headman's tongue recoiled in alarm. Luo, steadying a makeshift drill between the tips of his fingers, adjusted the position of his hand. He waited a few seconds for the treadle to speed up, then attacked the tooth with the needle, eliciting an ear-splitting shriek from the patient. No sooner had Luo withdrawn the needle than the headman rolled off the bed that we had set up next to the sewing machine. "You nearly killed me," he fumed. "What do you think you're doing?" "I warned you," the tailor said. "I've seen them do this kind of thing at county fairs, country fairs. Anyway, it was you who insisted on making us do this." "Well, it hurts like hell," said the headman. "It's bound to be painful," Luo said. "Do you realize the speed of an electric drill in a proper hospital? It's hundreds of rotations per second. The slower it turns, the more painful it is." "Try again," the headman said resolutely, adjusting his cap. "I've gone without sleep and food for a whole week already. Better to deal with this once and for all." He shut his eyes to avoid seeing the needle enter his mouth, but the result was the same as before. The excruciating pain propelled him off the bed with the needle still stuck in his tooth. His violent reaction almost upset the oil lamp, over which I was softening the lump of tin on a spoon. It was an absurd situation, but no one dared to laugh for fear of raising the subject of my arrest. Luo retrieved the needle, wiped it, inspected it closely, then suggested the patient rinse his mouth with a glass of water. The headman complied and spat out the liquid onto the floor next to his cap, which had slipped off his head. The water was pink. The old tailor seemed astonished. "You're bleeding," he said. "If you want me to fix your tooth," Luo said, reaching for the fallen cap and replacing it on the headman's rumpled hair, "I can't see any other way than to tie you to the bed." "Strap me down?" the headman cried indignantly. "You forget that I've got the commune leader's mandate." "But as your body is refusing to collaborate, I'm afraid we'll have to take extreme measures." I was flabbergasted. How could this tyrant, this political and economic despot, this police chief, ever resign himself to being restrained in this way? Which was not only humiliating, but also made him look utterly ridiculous. What the devil had got into him? I had no time to ponder the question. Then, and even today, it confounds me. As it is, Luo quickly strapped him down on the bed, and the tailor, charged with the awesome task of gripping the patient's head with both hands to keep it still, indicated that I should take his place working the treadle. This new responsibility filled me with trepidation. I took my shoes off, placed the ball of my foot on the treadle, and braced myself. At a sign from Luo, I set the drive wheel in motion, and soon my feet were pedaling away to the relentless rhythm of the machine. I accelerated, feeling like a cyclist racing at full tilt. The needle juddered, trembled, made contact once more with the treacherous tooth, whereupon a dreadful, gurgling noise rose from the throat of the immobilized headman. Not only was he lashed to the bed with a length of strong rope, like a bad guy in a film about to get his comeuppance, but his head was clamped in the old tailor's vice-like grip. His face was deathly pale, and he was foaming at the mouth. Suddenly, I felt the strings of an uncontrollably sadistic impulse, like a volcano about to erupt. I thought about all the miseries of re-education and slowed down the pace of the treadle. Luo shot me a glance of complicity. I pedaled even more slowly this time to punish him for threatening to take me into custody. It was as if the drill were about to break down. It was barely moving now, making just one rotation per second, maybe two, who knows. Eventually, having penetrated the decay, the steel point made a final tremor and came to a complete standstill as I lifted my feet off the treadle altogether like a cyclist freewheeling downhill. For a moment, the suspense was agonizing. I put on an air of innocent, calm deliberation to disguise the hatred smoldering in my eyes, and bent down in a pretense of checking whether the belt was still properly laid over the drive wheel. Then I replaced my feet on the treadle, and the needle began to turn again, slowly and shakily, as if the cyclist were struggling up a steep slope. It became a chisel cutting into a ghastly prehistoric rock face and releasing little puffs of greasy yellow dust. I had turned into a sadist, an out-and-out sadist. Chapter 16. The Old Miller's Story. Yes, indeed, I saw the two of them, both as naked as worms. I had gone to cut firewood down in the valley, as is my custom. I go there once a week, and always pass the waterfall. Where is it exactly? A kilometer or two away from my mill, or thereabouts. The torrent cascades onto some boulders 20 meters below and forms a deep pool of green water. It's quite far from the pathway, so people seldom find it. I didn't see them at once, but the birds roosting on the rocky promontory seemed to have been startled by something. They flew up and passed noisily over my head. Yes, they were ravens with red beaks. How did you guess? There must have been a dozen in all. One of them, perhaps it was more aggressive than the others, or more incensed at the disturbance, swooped down toward me, brushing my face with the tip of its wing. I can still remember the stench of it. Because of the birds, I took a detour and went down to the pool to see what had frightened them. It was there that I saw them, their heads above the surface. They must have plunged into the water from a high rock and made a loud splash, sending the ravens into flight. Your interpreter? No, I did not recognize him at once. I followed the two figures with my eyes, their bodies entwined, whirling round and round in the water. It was such an amazing sight that it took me a long while to realize that they were not simply swimming together. No, indeed. They were coupling underwater. What did you say? Coupling? Copulating? That word is too learned for the likes of me. Here on the mountain, we talk about coupling. I had no mention of spying on them. My old face reddened. I had never seen such a thing in my life, people making love while swimming. I was rooted to the spot. You know that at my age one is defenseless. They swam out of the deep water into the shallows and lay on a bed of stones where the limpid water glittering in the sun exaggerated and distorted their obscene movements. I felt ashamed, it is true, not because I could not take my eyes off of them, but because I was so keenly aware of being an old man whose body was limp where it was not bony. I understood full well that I would never taste the watery delights enjoyed by them. Afterwards, the girl gathered some leaves and fashioned a loincloth, which she tied around her hips. She did not seem as tired as her friend, quite the contrary. She was brimming with energy and clambered along the surrounding rocks. From time to time, she vanished behind a boulder covered in green moss and then reappeared on top of another, as if she had emerged from a fissure in the rock. She adjusted her loincloth so as to conceal her private parts and set about climbing up to a ledge about 10 meters above the pool. Of course, she could not see me. I had been very discreet, keeping myself hidden behind a leafy bush. I didn't know who the girl was. She had evidently never visited my mill. When she was standing on the rocky ledge overhead, I was close enough to admire her naked, dripping body. She stood there, fiddling with her loincloth, sliding it over her naked belly and under her firm, rosy-tipped breasts. The red-beaked ravens returned, alighting all around her on the high, narrow ledge. All of a sudden, she brushed them aside with her feet and took a few steps back. Then she rushed forward for a great leap into space, her arms outstretched like the wings of a swallow sailing on the breeze. The ravens followed suit. But before soaring into the sky, they dived down alongside the girl's flying body. She had become a swallow. Her wings extended, did not fold until she touched the surface of the water and plummeted into the depths. I looked around for her friend and saw him sitting naked on the shore, eyes closed, lolling against a rock. The secret part of his body was shrunken and sleeping. The thought flashed across my mind that I had seen the young man before, but I could not remember when. It was not until I was in the forest chopping down a tree that it hit me. The young man was the interpreter who accompanied you when you visited me a few months ago. It was lucky for him, your make-believe interpreter, that it was I who saw him, for I am not easily shocked, and have never denounced anyone to the Public Security Office. If it had been anyone else, he would have been in deep trouble, believe me.